The slam of my own front door made the walls tremble. Afternoon sunlight poured across the floorboards, catching the dust as Adrian stormed in like a hurricane. "Give me the new password, Mom," he shouted, his voice sharp enough to split the air. Behind him, Tessa stood with crossed arms and a smirk that chilled my blood. I could still hear the echo of the bank's decline beep from her phone. "My name is Eleanor Whitfield. I'm 70 years old, and my own family just tried to steal my life savings. But what they didn't know was..." Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family, especially by someone who once swore they loved you. Because what happened to me wasn't just about money. It was about power, pride, and how far blood will go when greed starts whispering. When you work in a clerk's office for 40 years, you learn that truth doesn't vanish, it just gets buried under paperwork. I used to joke that if God kept records, he'd probably store them in triplicate color-coded with my signature at the bottom. My name is Eleanor Whitfield, though most people in Cedar Ridge call me Mrs. W. I spent my life filing other people's marriages, divorces, deaths, and property deeds, every milestone sealed with ink and a notary stamp. After my husband Hank passed, I thought structure would keep me sane. Every morning, 6:30 sharp, I brewed coffee so strong it could wake the dead, watered the ferns by the kitchen window, and read the local paper front to back. Routine was my anchor. And for a long time, my son Adrian was my reason. Adrian was a quiet boy, always polite, the kind of kid who'd carry groceries for neighbors without being asked. When Hank died in that carpentry accident, one loose board, one bad step, I told myself I'd raise Adrian to be just like his father, honest, kind, hard-working. I sold Hank's old truck, paid off the mortgage, and saved every penny left. That house with the blue porch and creaky steps became our fortress. I didn't know it then, but the cracks started long before the shouting at the door. The first time Adrian brought Tessa home, I was making meatloaf, his favorite since he was 12. She walked in like she owned the air around her, all perfect curls and perfume that smelled like lilacs and money. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said, smiling too wide. "Your home is so vintage." Her tone slid between compliment and insult, like honey hiding vinegar. Adrian looked at her the way young men look when they're already half in love and half blind. I welcomed her anyway. She was my son's choice. And back then I thought love softened people. I was wrong. After they got married, Tessa visited often, always with small requests spoken like confessions. "Mrs. Whitfield, I hate to ask, but we're short this month. Could you help us with rent?" It was $200 the first time. "Just till Friday," she said. Then $500 for car repairs, then $800 for Adrian's dental work. Each time she hugged me tightly, smelled like expensive lotion, and called me Mom. When they finally stopped paying me back, I told myself it was fine. Family helps family. That's what I believed. But generosity is like a well, you don't realize it's dry until you reach the bottom. One Sunday lunch, I noticed Tessa scrolling through her phone, flashing her new designer handbag. It was a sale, she explained before I could ask. Adrian kept his eyes on his plate. That was the first time I felt the faint sting of humiliation in my own dining room. Then came the credit card. "Just for emergencies," she'd said, her voice sugar-sweet. "It'll make things easier." I hesitated. Hank's old watch felt heavy on my wrist. But she was family right. I handed it over. For a while nothing seemed off. Groceries, gas, pharmacy, normal things. Then the receipts began to change. Fancy restaurants, designer boutiques, spas. When I brought it up, Tessa laughed. "Oh, Mrs. W., that was a mistake. They must have charged the wrong card." And somehow every month more mistakes appeared. Adrian defended her. "Mom, you're making it sound worse than it is. She's helping us manage things." Helping, she was draining me, one swipe at a time. Still, I kept quiet. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was fear of losing the only family I had left. Then one summer afternoon while watering the geraniums, my phone rang. "Mrs. Whitfield, this is Harold from Cedar Ridge Savings. We're calling to confirm a $1,200 purchase at Tech World." My hand froze midair. "I didn't authorize that," I said. "Please block the card immediately." 20 minutes later, Tessa called, voice sharp. "Why did you cancel the card? I'm at the grocery store. I can't pay." "It's my card, Tessa," I told her. "There were unauthorized charges." She went silent, then hissed. "So now you think I'm a thief?" The word hung between us like smoke. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in Hank's old recliner, the same one where he'd taught Adrian to tie fishing knots, and replayed every small decision that led me here. Somewhere between kindness and naivety, I'd let my life become someone else's wallet. The next morning I made a decision. I changed the password. When Adrian found out, he barged in like a storm. His anger filled the house, his voice echoing off the walls. "You humiliated her in public. You've never been this cruel. Cruel." As if protecting my own money was an act of violence. That was the day I saw my son not as my boy, but as a man molded by someone else's will. After they left, silence returned to my home. But it wasn't peace, it was heavy, suffocating. I stood by the window staring at the flower beds Hank had built, wondering when love had turned into obligation, and obligation into ownership. A few days later, Ruby Sandoval knocked on my door. She was my neighbor, retired librarian, sharp as a needle. "You've been quiet lately," she said, handing me a bag of scones. I smiled weakly. "Just some family trouble." She tilted her head. "Financial trouble." My face must have betrayed me. "I don't know what to call it," I admitted. "Call it what it is," Ruby said. "Financial abuse, and don't think it only happens to strangers." Her words sliced through the fog. Financial abuse. I'd read about it in the newspaper stories about elderly parents tricked by their own children. But not me, I thought. Not my son. I didn't know it then, but Ruby's words would become my lifeline. That night I took out my old office binder, the same kind I used back at the clerk's office, and began filing my own evidence: bank statements, receipts, printed emails. The paper didn't lie. $22,600 spent in under 2 years, most of it on things I'd never touched, never seen, never approved. I placed each page in a labeled sleeve: restaurants, cosmetics, electronics, cash withdrawals. The rhythm of the hole puncher calmed me. For the first time in months I felt in control again. But control, I would soon learn, always comes at a price. The next morning a letter arrived. It wasn't from the bank. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. Notice of petition for guardianship. Eleanor M. Whitfield. I read the words twice, my hands trembling. My own son had filed for legal control over my finances. The world tilted. My vision blurred. Hank's watch ticked loudly, steady, mocking. Guardianship. They wanted to declare me incompetent. I didn't know it then, but that single document was the spark that would burn everything else down. The letter trembled in my hands as if it were alive. The paper was thick, expensive, and the logo in gold ink screamed arrogance. Calloway and Associates. I didn't need to Google it. Everyone in Cedar Ridge knew Brent Calloway, the lawyer who turned family into business. The type of man who smiled while selling your soul clause by clause. The document stated that my son Adrian Whitfield was petitioning for guardianship in the best interest of his mother's financial and mental well-being. In simpler words, it claimed I was no longer fit to manage my own life. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same place I'd taught Adrian his multiplication tables, and reread every word until they blurred together. My pulse thudded in my ears. My son, my only child, filing to strip me of my rights. I didn't cry, not yet. Years at the clerk's office had trained me to freeze before reacting. Breathe first, file later. I opened my binder and slipped the notice into a new section: legal threats. Then I called Ruby. She arrived in less than 10 minutes, still wearing her gardening gloves. "Show me," she said simply. When she read the letter, her jaw tightened. "You need a lawyer, Nora. A real one. And fast. I can't afford a long legal battle." "You can't afford not to fight this." Ruby's tone left no room for argument. "I'll call someone I know, Martin Keegan. He used to handle elder fraud cases for the state before starting his own practice." That afternoon, I found myself sitting across from Keegan in his small brick office downtown. Books lined the walls, not for show but from use. He had kind eyes and the voice of someone who'd seen too much injustice to waste time on niceties. "Mrs. Whitfield," he began, "what you're describing isn't rare. Family financial abuse happens in silence until the victim pushes back. Then they flip the narrative, make you look unstable." "They're my family," I whispered. "My son." He nodded slowly. "That's what makes it so painful. But legally it doesn't change the facts. Tell me everything from the first withdrawal." I told him. The groceries, the emergency loans, the Tech World purchase, the insults, every line of betrayal that had led me to his office. Keegan scribbled notes on a yellow legal pad, his pen moving fast. When I finished, he leaned back. They're not just using your card, they're preparing to take everything. This guardianship filing is the last step before total control. Can I stop it? Yes, but we'll need proof. Hard, documented proof that you're mentally capable, that your finances were abused without consent, and that the guardianship claim is malicious. Proof. That word I understood. I had lived by it. I've kept every receipt, I said quietly, every statement for the last 24 months. Keegan's eyebrows lifted. Then we have a fighting chance. The next few days felt like slipping back into my old job, meticulous, relentless, focused. I became my own case clerk. I cross-referenced dates, highlighted patterns, flagged anomalies. Each piece of paper was another nail in the coffin of their lies. Meanwhile, Ruby helped me organize witness accounts. She remembered the times Tessa had flaunted new jewelry, her words dripping with false modesty. "Mrs. W., you're too generous," she'd once said, laughing over brunch. We also went to see Dr. Naomi Patel, my longtime physician. She examined me, ran memory tests, and asked questions that made me feel like both a patient and a person. When we finished, she smiled. "Eleanor, your cognition is perfectly normal. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She promised to prepare a formal report. That night I felt something new resolve, the kind Hank used to call steel under silk. But Adrian and Tessa didn't stop. 2 days later, I found a rumor spreading through the neighborhood, small comments whispered at the grocery store, sideways glances at church. Poor Mrs. Whitfield. Such a shame, losing her memory like that. I confronted Ruby first. "Did you hear what they're saying?" "I did," she said grimly. "Tessa's been telling people you left the stove on 3 times last week." I laughed bitterly. "I haven't even used the stove 3 times this week." The smear campaign had begun. Then came the paint. One morning I stepped outside to find red letters sprayed across my mailbox, "Crazy Miser." My knees almost gave out. I stood there staring at the dripping paint as the sun rose behind the pines. The cruelty of it was almost artistic. Ruby helped me scrub it off, both of us silent except for the squeak of the sponge. "They're trying to break you before the hearing," she said finally. "Don't give them the satisfaction." That afternoon, while sorting through statements, I noticed something strange. Multiple ATM withdrawals, same day, same hour, but from different locations across town. Impossible. I didn't even drive after dark. I called Harold Kim at Cedar Ridge Savings. He'd known me for 30 years. "Harold, I need you to pull the security footage for those transactions." He hesitated. "Mrs. W. I'm not sure I'm authorized to Harold, I cut in, my voice steady. "You know me. You've seen my signature on more documents than anyone. Please." He sighed. "Give him 2 days." When I came to the bank that Friday, Harold met me in his office with a USB drive and a look of quiet guilt. "You didn't get this from me," he said. I plugged it into my laptop that night. What I saw made my stomach twist. Tessa, perfect hair, perfect smile, standing at an ATM, my card in her hand. Timestamp 3:07 a.m. Same night she told me she was homesick. My pulse pounded in my ears. Proof. Cold, undeniable proof. Still, a part of me hoped Adrian didn't know. Maybe she'd done it behind his back. But that illusion shattered when I saw the second clip, Adrian beside her, glancing around nervously while she withdrew the cash. The betrayal was complete. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, Hank's watch ticking on my wrist, thinking about the promise he'd made years ago. No matter what happens, Nora, keep records. People can lie, but paper can't. He'd been right. By dawn, I'd already printed screenshots, labeled the evidence, and written a summary in my neat clerk's handwriting. It was clinical detached until I reached the line where I had to write their names. Adrian Whitfield and Tessa Lane Whitfield. That's when my hands finally began to shake. The next morning, Keegan called. "We're filing our own petition," he said, "to contest the guardianship and expose financial exploitation, but we'll need a private investigator to trace the digital trail. I know someone, Paige Larkin. She's the best." When Paige arrived, tall, sharp, carrying 2 laptops, she smiled slightly. "Mrs. Whitfield, let's find where your money went." 3 hours later, she looked up from her screen. "Found them. 3 secondary credit cards opened in your name, all registered to your son's address." I gripped the edge of the table. 3. Yes. One for shopping, one for cash advances, one linked to online accounts. Whoever did this used your social security number and email to set them up. The IP address traces back to their apartment. I closed my eyes. Can we prove it? Absolutely. And we will. When Paige left, Ruby poured me tea, her hands warm around mine. You've got them cornered now. I wanted to believe her, but part of me knew people like Tessa didn't stop when cornered, they attacked harder. And I was right. 2 days later, I received another knock on my door. This time it wasn't Ruby or Harold. It was a man in a suit holding a briefcase and a court seal. Mrs. Whitfield, he said, you've been summoned to appear before the county court. The hearing for guardianship has been scheduled. I thanked him politely, closed the door, and leaned against it, breathing in the silence. They wanted a war, and for the first time in my life I was ready to give them one. The days leading to the hearing felt like walking on cracked ice, one wrong step, and everything would sink. I woke every morning before sunrise, made coffee I couldn't finish, and sat at my dining table surrounded by papers like a general studying a battle map. Every receipt, every photo, every withdrawal, my ammunition. But the enemy didn't sleep either. Tessa started a new campaign, polished, manipulative, and venomous in its sweetness. She called relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, painting herself as a devoted daughter-in-law, trying to protect her fragile mother-in-law. She's been forgetful, she whispered to one cousin. She left the oven on twice last week. We're just so worried she might hurt herself. By the weekend, even the pastor from our church stopped by. Mrs. Whitfield, he said gently, people are saying you've been under stress. Maybe let your son help you for a while. I smiled politely, even as my chest burned. Thank you, Pastor, but I think I can still tell my own oven from a hallucination. He left embarrassed, but the damage was done. Cedar Ridge was a small town. Gossip traveled faster than the mail. Everywhere I went, the market, the post office, I saw pity in people's eyes. The same eyes that once respected me as the woman who never misplaced a single form. Meanwhile, Paige kept digging. One evening she came by with a USB stick and her trademark half-smirk. Found something, she said. Tessa's been emailing a local realtor named Candace Gray. They've already drafted a conditional sale agreement for your house, effective only if the guardianship is approved. I felt my throat tighten. They plan to sell my home. Within a week of getting control. The emails are time-stamped, and there's even a meeting on Tessa's calendar with a man named Brent Calloway, your son's lawyer. Brent again. The vulture in a tailored suit. Paige showed me the message's lines of text, so cold they barely felt human. Once the property is liquidated, allocate funds to debt settlement and investment portfolio per attached schedule. My home reduced to a line item. That night I called Adrian. My fingers shook dialing his number. When he answered, his voice was distant, mechanical. Mom. Adrian, I know about the house. He hesitated. What are you talking about? The sale agreement. The emails. Tessa and Calloway. Silence. Then a sigh. Mom, you're being paranoid again. We're not selling anything. Tessa was just exploring options in case... In case what? In case you win. He exhaled sharply. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I'm making it harder to steal from me. His voice snapped like a whip. Do you even hear yourself? You sound insane. Then why does your wife have 3 credit cards in my name? That stopped him. Long enough for me to hear the truth in his silence. I didn't know about that, he said finally. Tessa handles the finances. I laughed bitterly. Then maybe she should be the one sitting in court next week. Before he could answer, I hung up. The next day I found my car keyed again, this time the word liar carved deep into the paint. Ruby insisted we call the police, but I refused. I didn't want to give them another narrative to twist. Instead, I documented everything, photos, timestamps, even weather conditions. Keegan said every detail mattered. That afternoon we met at his office to prepare for the hearing. He laid out the evidence across the table, like puzzle pieces, bank statements, camera footage, Dr. Patel's report. They'll try to question your competence, he said. Our job is to stay ahead. Every time they attack your memory, we counter with documentation. Every time they imply confusion, we show precision. I nodded. I've lived my life by records. I won't fail at that now. He smiled faintly. Then they've already lost half the battle. But victory still felt distant. That night, while reviewing my notes, I received a voicemail from Tessa. Her voice trembled not from fear but performance. "Eleanor, please let's not do this in court. It's humiliating for all of us. Adrian's health is suffering. He's drinking again because of you. If you ever loved your son, you'll stop this." The mention of drinking hit me like a punch. I hadn't known. I called Ruby, my voice shaking. "Did you know about Adrian's drinking?" She hesitated. "I didn't want to tell you before the hearing. There's a DUI record from years ago buried quietly. Tessa's been using it to control him. Blackmail." I sank into my chair. So she's holding his mistakes over his head. Ruby's voice softened. "He's weak, not evil. But she's got him trapped." The revelation didn't make me hate him less. It just made everything more tragic. The next morning, Paige texted, "Check your porch camera feed as soon as possible." I opened the app, and there it was, Tessa standing at my door the night before, dropping a thick envelope into my mailbox. Inside were photos doctored, cruelly edited. Receipts of evidence that I'd supposedly forgotten, bill payments, bounced checks, lost track of appointments, a fabricated timeline of incompetence. It wasn't just a smear anymore. It was perjury in progress. I stared at the photos until dawn, anger pulsing like static in my veins. They wanted me confused. They wanted me scared. Instead, they just handed me another weapon. And for the first time in months, I smiled. The week of the hearing, Cedar Ridge felt colder, sharper, like the town itself knew something ugly was about to surface. The maple trees were turning red, the kind of beauty that mocked you while everything inside was breaking. Keegan warned me that people like Tessa always strike hardest right before losing control. He was right. 3 days before court, I received a letter from my insurance company. It said my homeowner's policy had been voluntarily transferred to a new account, Adrian's. I called immediately. "I never authorized this," I told the agent. "Well, ma'am," she said, hesitant, "the paperwork came with your digital signature. It was verified through your email." My stomach dropped. "Which email?" Whitfield1970 @gmail. "That's not mine." Someone had created a fake email account just one letter off from my real address and used it to redirect my policies, my bank alerts, even a tax refund. Paige later found that it all traced back to Adrian's apartment router. I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I wrote another note for my evidence binder: identity theft, cross-link insurance fraud. Every betrayal had a category now. That made it easier to breathe. 2 nights before the hearing, Ruby slept on my couch. "You shouldn't be alone," she said simply. We sat in silence while rain beat against the window, the steady tick of my husband's old watch filling the pauses. "Do you ever think they'll regret it?" I asked. Ruby looked at me over her teacup. "Regret requires conscience, honey." We laughed softly, though there was nothing funny left in us. The next day, Paige brought one last piece of the puzzle. "This might be the key," she said, sliding a file onto my kitchen table. It was an audio clip recorded from a diner security feed. The voices were faint but clear enough. "Brent Calloway, if we play this right, the judge will grant guardianship in a week. The old lady won't know what hit her. Tessa. And then we list the house-settled debts, maybe a vacation after. You think the realtor can get a cash buyer fast?" Brent already lined up. Paige looked at me. "You still think you're powerless?" I pressed play again. Tessa's laughter filled the kitchen, sharp, practiced, cruel. The sound didn't break me, it hardened me. "Make 3 copies," I said. "One for Keegan, one for the court, and one for me." She smiled. "You're learning fast." The morning of the hearing, I woke before dawn. The world outside was wet and quiet, and my reflection in the mirror looked older than I remembered, but also sharper. I put on my gray cardigan, pressed Hank's watch against my wrist, and whispered, "Let's finish this." At the courthouse steps, Tessa stood with Adrian and Brent. She looked immaculate, cream coat, red lips, crocodile tears ready on cue. When our eyes met, she smiled, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Morning, Eleanor," she said smoothly. "You look tired." "Must be all that bookkeeping," I replied. "You'd be surprised how much a woman remembers when her life depends on it." She blinked, thrown off, before turning away. Inside the courtroom was sterile and bright. Judge Reeves presided, his face carved from stone. Tessa played her part flawlessly, speaking, softly wringing her hands. Adrian kept his eyes down. Brent began with false sympathy. Your Honor, this is a simple case of concern. My client's mother has shown signs of confusion and financial instability. Our goal is merely to ensure her safety. Keegan rose. And my client's goal is to protect her autonomy from those pretending to safeguard it. He clicked the remote. The monitor lit up with the first image: Tessa withdrawing money at an ATM time-stamped 3:07 a.m. The courtroom went silent. Then came the email trail, the fake insurance transfers, the doctor's cognitive report. Every click was another nail in their story's coffin. But the real blow came last. Keegan pressed play on the diner recording. Tessa's voice filled the room. The old lady won't know what hit her. Brent's pen froze in his hand. Adrian looked up for the first time, pale as chalk. The judge leaned forward. Is that your voice, Mrs. Whitfield? Tessa stammered. That's taken out of context. Then explain the context in which you plan to sell your mother-in-law's house after declaring her incompetent, Reeves said coolly. The silence that followed was the kind you could bottle. Tessa's mask cracked. She turned to Adrian, whispering something through clenched teeth, but he didn't answer. He was already crumbling, guilt breaking through the fog she'd built around him. Keegan handed over the final exhibit, a printed transcript of the recording, notarized and authenticated. Your Honor, we request dismissal of the guardianship petition and restitution for damages. The gavel came down like thunder. Petition denied. Mrs. Whitfield retains full control of her estate. Further, the court refers Miss Lane Whitfield and Mr. Calloway for investigation regarding fraud and perjury. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just exhaled for the first time in months. As people filed out, Adrian lingered. He looked smaller, broken. Mom, he said softly, I didn't know it would go this far. You never do until it's too late, I replied. He started to speak, but Tessa grabbed his arm. Don't you dare. I cut her off. You should go, Tessa. The bank statements speak louder than you ever could. She glared, eyes like glass. You'll regret this. No, I said quietly. You will. And as she stormed out, heels echoing down the hall, I felt the weight lift, one signature, one receipt, one piece of truth at a time. Outside, Ruby waited on the courthouse steps holding 2 cups of coffee. You did it, she said simply. I smiled, the autumn sun hitting my face. No, I said, we documented it. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. People like Tessa didn't disappear, they regrouped. And part of me couldn't help but wonder what she'd try next. The day after the hearing should have felt like victory. The judgment was clear, the guardianship denied, the fraud exposed. But peace doesn't come quickly to those who've been hunted for months. It comes in fragments, quiet and suspicious, like the world waiting for your next mistake. That night I sat by the kitchen window again, Hank's old watch ticking against the glass. Outside, the wind was sharp, carrying the smell of wet pine and asphalt. I should have been sleeping. Instead, I was staring at a folder, everything we'd gathered, every receipt, every recording. It wasn't closure I felt. It was awareness. Because people like Tessa didn't lose. They schemed. At midnight, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. Mrs. Whitfield. The voice was low, cautious. This is Paige Larkin. Sorry for the late call. You might want to check your email. Something's up. I opened my laptop. There was an alert from my credit monitoring service. New account opened, First Line Mortgage Corp. I froze. The address matched my house. My name was listed as co-signer. She's trying to mortgage the property, Paige said grimly. Using forged documents filed online. She must still have your social security number from the old card setup. My heart thudded, but the court order won't stop her from trying. It just makes it a felony this time. Keegan answered on the second ring, his voice raspy from sleep but sharp. Keep everything as is, he said. Don't call her, don't text her. I'll contact the sheriff first thing in the morning. I hung up, pacing the room. Every nerve in my body buzzed. I'd already survived the courtroom, the humiliation, the betrayal, but this was different. This was defiance. And maybe it was time I stopped defending. Time I went on the offense. I opened my filing cabinet, pulled out the folder labeled contingency. Inside were photocopies, bank logs, recorded calls, the diner transcript, and the insurance fraud letters, everything that hadn't yet gone public. At the bottom was an envelope labeled Ruby, open if anything happens. I had written it weeks ago when fear still lived in my chest, but now I wanted something else, something louder. I called Jenna Park, the local reporter who'd once covered an elder exploitation case Ruby told me about. She answered on the second ring. "This is Jenna." "Miss Park," I said, "my name is Eleanor Whitfield. I think I have a story you'll want to hear." There was a pause. "The guardianship case, the one Reeves presided over." "Yes," I said, my voice steady. But that wasn't the end of it. 2 hours later, Jenna was sitting in my kitchen camera, rolling her recorder, blinking red. The storm outside rattled the windows, thunder rumbling like distant drums. I told her everything, from the first missing grocery payment to the fake mortgage application. She listened, barely breathing, occasionally glancing at the documents I'd spread across the table like evidence in a crime board. "Do you want to be anonymous?" she asked quietly. "No," I said. "I want my name on it." They tried to erase my identity, let them see the face they failed to destroy. When she left, I felt something electric inside me, like courage but sharper. I cleaned the kitchen, made tea, and waited. By sunrise, the video was live. The thumbnail read, "She tried to declare her mother-in-law incompetent, then got exposed in court." By noon, it had 1,000,000 views. Tessa's face, her perfect filtered mask, filled the screen as Jenna played the diner audio. Viewers flooded the comments. How could her own son let this happen? This woman deserves prison. Respect to Eleanor, she fought back. By evening, the story had been picked up by local TV. The sheriff's office received dozens of calls demanding an investigation into Tessa and her lawyer Brent Calloway. That night, I received another call from Adrian. "Mom," he said, voice trembling, "they're everywhere. Tessa's losing it. Reporters are outside the apartment. She's blaming me." "She forged my name again, Adrian." "I didn't know," he said quickly. "I swear I didn't." "Then maybe it's time you stop standing next to her when she burns things." He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller. "I'm sorry." "Sorry won't fix it," I said softly, "but telling the truth might." And to my surprise, he did. The next morning, Keegan called. "Adrian's here," he said. "He's signing an affidavit confirming Tessa's role in the forged mortgage. It's over, Nora. This time for real." I exhaled, but the relief came with a strange sadness. Because even justice can't restore what trust destroys. A week later, sheriff's deputies arrested Tessa at her boutique. Cameras flashed, customers stared, and her carefully constructed life crumbled in front of everyone. I watched it on the evening news, my tea growing cold. The reporter said she was being charged with multiple counts: identity theft, attempted fraud, perjury. Brent was under investigation for unethical conduct. When they showed her being led away, she looked at the cameras not with shame but disbelief, like the world had betrayed her. Ruby turned to me. "You should feel proud." I nodded, but my chest ached. "I just feel finished." That night I went for a walk, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot. The air was cold enough to sting, and the moonlight spilled over the old oak trees like silver paint. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid to be outside after dark. When I came home, I stopped at the doorway looking at the house. Hank built every beam, every nail, every inch of it tied to a memory. I thought about how close I'd come to losing it all. Not because of strangers, but because of family. And then I thought of what Hank used to say, "The strongest wood comes from the storm." I smiled, faintly, resting my hand on the doorframe. "We made it through, Hank," I whispered. "She can't take this from us." As I stepped inside, the wind carried a faint scent of pine and rain, the same smell from the night everything began. Only this time, it didn't smell like fear. It smelled like survival. But in the back of my mind, I still heard Tessa's last words echoing down that courthouse hall: "You'll regret this." I didn't know if she meant revenge or warning. But one thing was certain: if she ever tried again, I'd be ready. Because I'd learned something about power. It's not about control. It's about evidence. And I had plenty of that. A month later, Cedar Ridge had moved on, or at least pretended to. The courthouse steps that once held reporters now hosted coffee drinkers and pigeons. My story had become something people whispered about in the produce aisle. That's the woman who beat her own daughter-in-law in court, they'd say half in awe, half in discomfort. But beneath that calm surface, the storm hadn't fully passed. It was a Tuesday morning when I got the letter. No return address postmarked from Raleigh. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no words, just a photo. Tessa, standing outside a law office, her hair tied back, a new name on the sign beside her: Tessa L. Monroe, Senior Advisor, Care Trust Foundation, a nonprofit specializing in elder guardianship services. The irony nearly made me laugh. The same woman who tried to strip me of my autonomy was now branding herself as a protector of the vulnerable. But beneath that new name and clean image, I could still see her, the manipulative gleam behind her polite smile, the hunger for control she could never quiet. I took a breath, then slid the photo into a file marked pending. Paige always said to keep a paper trail even for your enemies. Later that week, Ruby came by with groceries. She noticed the open folder on the table. "You're not done, are you?" she asked. "People like her don't stop," I said simply. "They just change tactics." Ruby nodded slowly. "Then maybe we don't either." That afternoon, I met with Jenna and Keegan at his office. We'd been talking about starting something bigger than my case, a resource for others like me, victims of quiet domestic exploitation. Silver Shield, Jenna said, testing the name aloud. A network for the elderly who can't speak up. I smiled. And for the ones who've learned to. Keegan handed me a fresh binder, the first draft of the Foundation Charter. "We'll register it next week. You'll be its first director, Eleanor." I traced my finger over the embossed title, Silver Shield, Protecting Independence with Dignity. For the first time in years, I felt something close to purpose, not revenge, not bitterness, but clarity. As I walked home that evening, the air smelled like rain again. My porch light flickered once, then steadied, glowing against the dark. Inside, Hank's watch ticked softly on the counter. Each second felt deliberate, like a heartbeat, returning to rhythm after a long storm. I picked up the phone and called Ruby. "Let's get to work," I said, because I knew the truth now. Justice wasn't a moment, it was maintenance. And as long as women like Tessa existed, I'd keep my records ready, precise, waiting for the next time someone mistook kindness for weakness. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, you're not alone. I was told I was too old, too soft, too forgetful to fight back, but the truth is you don't need power to win. You just need proof, patience, and the will to stand your ground. So if you've ever been underestimated, if someone tried to take what's yours and call it for your own good, hit that subscribe button. Because my story isn't over, and neither is yours. The next chapter starts when we stop being afraid to tell the truth.